this first program, the Salisbury Forum's 2022-2023 season. I am Pat Jenny. I'm the president of the Salisbury Forum, and along with the members of our board, we are all thrilled to be partnering with the Lakeville Journal Foundation, which is the owner of our local weekly newspaper, the Lakeville Journal, which I'm sure all of you know is celebrating its 125th birthday. So together this evening, we are tackling a critical issue of our time, nothing less than the future of American journalism. As many of you know, the Salisbury Forum is a 17-year-old nonprofit whose mission is to bring speakers who are experts on global issues that affect the community here in the northwest corner of Connecticut. We are very happy to be back in this beautifully renovated auditorium at Hotchkiss, one of the 3 schools who host our forums, along with Salisbury School and the Housatonic Valley Regional High School. The forum communicates through a pretty robust listserv of about 1,800 individuals and through our website, salisburyforum.org, where you will find videos of our past programs that are posted within a few days of each forum. And in fact, our videos are watched by hundreds of viewers in the weeks following the programs. The Salisbury Forum relies completely on local support from several hundred individuals, many of you are here this evening, as well as local business sponsors and small grants. Thank you to everyone who has made a contribution that allow us to provide these forums free to the public. Our upcoming forums this fall include the famed humorist Roy Blunt Jr., who will bring us some levity next month on Friday, October 21st at Housatonic Valley Regional High School. And then on Friday, November 18th, also at Husi, we are thrilled to bring back Akil Reed Amar, who is professor of constitutional law at Yale. And he's coming back for his 6th visit to the Salisbury Forum. Professor Amar will pick up a theme of this evening's panel, that is the critical role that journalism plays in our democracy. So before introducing our panel, let me turn to Janet Manko, who is the publisher and editor-in-chief of the Lakeville Journal, for her vote.
Thank you, Pat, and thanks to the Salisbury Forum for partnering with us to present this important discussion on the future of journalism tonight. For us at the Lakeville Journal, it's local journalism, of course, that is and has been the center of our focus from week to week and year to year over the entire 125 years of our existence. And we are here to celebrate our 125th anniversary this summer only because of the generous and unflinching support of our readers, many of whom I know are here tonight. So thank you for your support. Otherwise, you would not have a local community weekly newspaper. You do. We thank you profoundly for saving the Lakeville Journal back in 2019 when our future was so uncertain, and we thank you for continuing to care about journalism, especially local journalism. It's only with the kind of creative thinking we will hear tonight that it will become clear what should come next. This is the way that journalism will continue its mission of service to the communities it covers, whether locally, nationally, or globally. I can't wait to hear this discussion among such an illustrious group of journalists. It will surely enlighten all of us. And then I can't wait to hear the questions afterward from all of you. The Salisbury Forum audiences always ask the best questions. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. So let us turn to introductions of our panelists tonight. Our moderator, Brian Ross, Brian, you want to raise your hand, has served for more than 4 decades as a television correspondent, for 20 years with NBC, and as chief investigative correspondent at ABC until 2018. During that time, he covered numerous stories from the September 11th attacks to congressional scandals to Bernie Madoff, leading to a best-selling book called The Madoff Chronicles. Brian's work has earned numerous awards, including multiple Peabodys and Emmys and the Edward R. Murrow Award. In 2018, he joined the Law and Crime Network as chief investigative correspondent and continues to expose government and corporate corruption on a weekly show. He also has a show right here on Robin Hood Radio every Thursday called Brian Ross Investigates. He has probably one of the busiest so-called retirements I've heard of. And he is a neighbor here, has lived in Sharon for 36 years, and he tells me that he has a documentary coming out on HBO in November called Unveiled. It sounds very interesting, so watch for that. Martin Barron, served as the executive editor of the Washington Post from 2013 until last year, during which time the Post news staff grew from 580 to 1,000 journalists, earning 10 Pulitzer Prizes for investigative reporting, public service, and other features. Prior to the Post, Marty was editor of the Boston Globe, which won 6 Pulitzer Prizes under his leadership, perhaps most famously for its feature 2003 spotlight investigation of the Catholic Church's history of sexual abuse. Prior to the Globe, Marty also worked in leadership positions at the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Miami Herald. He is also a neighbor and has a home in Stockbridge. One of his colleagues at the Miami Herald years ago is John COSTON. John became editor of the Lakeville Journal just in April of this year. He had a 33-year career at the Wall Street Journal, where he served as deputy foreign editor, markets editor, and national news editor. And prior to the Journal, he worked for some Connecticut papers, the Watertown Daily Times and the Hartford Courant. Many of you might know, but probably don't, that he has also spent 40 years on a farm in East Canaan, where he and his wife raise sheep. And he is an author of several true crime books. And finally, SUBRATA D is joining us tonight from New York City, where she serves as the Executive Vice President and Global Head of Programming at Vice News. Vice News produces daily documentary essays and video through its website and YouTube channel. SUBRATA has investigated stories about the complexities of confronting sexual assault and how property laws harm Black landowners, just to give you 2 examples. She has also collected Emmy, Peabody, and DuPont Columbia Awards. Prior to Vice, SUBRATA worked at ABC News, where she helped develop its digital strategy, and was a producer for 9 years at NBC. So please join me in welcoming this amazing panel.
All right, Pat, thank you very much. Our topic tonight is the future of journalism, and I think for many of us, the future is here. So let me start by asking each of you, how do you get your news every day? What do you read? What do you listen to? Who do you watch? How do you get it? Marty?
Sure. Well, as soon as I get up, and fortunately these days I can get up a little later than I did at 5 o'clock every morning at the Washington Post. I just go online. I'm totally online. I do not get a print product at all these days because I'm not always in the same location. And so, I get the Washington Post. That might not surprise you. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Berkshire Eagle. I get a newsletter immediately from Bloomberg, which I subscribe to. I subscribe to the New Yorker and the Atlantic, and I get their newsletters as well. And then there are a couple of online sites like Puck, which covers a lot of media, so I monitor that as well. And there are a few others as well.
Do you watch TV?
Hardly at all. I hardly watch any television. Streaming. So watch that.
How about for you, SUBRATA? How do you start your day? How do you get your news?
I do watch TV. I think that is still a part of how I do consume news. Whether it's for the information or not, I do think it's sort of taking the pulse on what's going on in the moment, and it's important to know that. But I am on a lot of the platforms now that I think our audience is on. So my daughter's going to laugh here at me, but I do look at TikTok. We just launched a news program on Twitch. In addition to definitely going to newsletters, to the New York Times. I do a lot more reading than you would think for somebody who's in such a visual space professionally. And I would say that it isn't a daily set of places that I go. I think it varies daily. I mostly just really need to know where people are and what they're consuming. I think that's very important. So I listen to a lot of radio. So I think BBC, CBC, and NPR are probably how I kind of get, sort of a full scope of what's happening in the day.
John Coston, how about yourself?
Well, I start my day off looking out the window to make sure all my sheep are still in the and if they are, then I can turn to the news. But the thing, I look at a lot of local sources and national sources and international. So I start my day off with the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Reuters, BBC. I kind of cover myself there. And then I turn on the TV. I can't turn it off. I watch CNN a lot, and then switch over to Fox to see how that's going, and PBS at the end of the day. I look at Northwest Corner Chatter, which is a Facebook feed up here, Instagram, and Waterbury Republican, Hartford Current. So a lot of it is now, because I'm at the Lakeville Journal and looking for competition coverage, I survey what's going on around here, including many newsletters that come into the office from the towns around here. There are lots of really good stories in all of those newsletters. And that's really pretty much how it adds up. I think because I've been working so long, I have friends in many different newspapers still, and so I tend to go to them to see what my friends are up to.
Marty, under your editorship, the Washington Post adopted the slogan, the motto, "Democracy dies in darkness." Where did that come from, and why did you feel the need to say that?
Well, I wasn't the one pressing for it. It was Jeff Bezos, our owner, who acquired the Post 9 months after I arrived there. So we did not have a motto, unlike the New York Times, which at one time had all the news that's fit to print. But of course, that is a little out of date. And then it has a motto today, but I can't remember it. So in any event, Bezos wanted to have something that really defined our special mission, our differentiated mission in Washington, our contribution to society, and something that people would remember, something that people would feel like it's not just a product that you want to buy, it's a club you want to belong to, and something, as he put it, that you could put on a t-shirt and people would be proud to wear that t-shirt. And so that all sounds very simple, except that it was just incredibly difficult to do. And it took us a year and a half of thousands of ideas, many of them terrible. And ultimately we settled on Democracy Dies in Darkness, which was a adaptation of something that Bob Woodward had said over the years, which was an adaptation of something a judge had said during the Watergate era. It's not your standard kind of marketing slogan. Most marketers would not be in favor of having death and darkness in their slogan, but it became quite popular and memorable, and it seems like everywhere I go, people recall the phrase.
Was it defensive because of the president talking about the Washington Post and others?
No, well, he wasn't president when we were thinking about the motto, and it had nothing to do with Trump whatsoever. We were working on it well before he was elected. We announced it after he was elected, and so people assumed that it had something to do with Trump. And then when he was defeated in 2020, then actually there were a number of people who would write us and say, okay, you should drop the motto now. I said, no, this is a motto forever. This is not something that we just had for Trump. And the Post has held on to it.
SUBRATA, during the era of Trump, what has that meant for news gathering, for Vice and for others? You were at ABC and NBC for years. You follow all this.
I do. It was interesting going from very traditional places like NBC and ABC, and then going to Vice. But what attracted me to it was that nobody expected the organization to be establishment at all. I mean, I think that after years of sitting in the White House press corps and other places and feeling, and on some level, that maybe the challenging questions weren't being asked. And again, I have a lot of respect for all my colleagues who are White House correspondents, but I do think there certainly was a sense that, inside the bubble, you don't necessarily get to report in the ways that probably needed to happen leading up to the election and beyond. Vice News was never in the bubble. Our motto is breaking the news. And it is really that. It was never an expectation to be inside those sort of rooms where people had access to the kind of upper echelons of decision makers. It was all about challenging them. Our real sort of push and drive and passion is you have to physically be where the story is happening. And that is true for everybody, I think, it's still in print. And for me, certainly coming up in the industry, that was true too. We went to where stories were happening. We didn't talk about it. We had to see it. We had to see it. We had to smell it, breathe it. That's still true at Vice. We don't report on anything that a team hasn't actually seen, reported on, and has some sort of local connection and reflection.
SUBRATA, one of our mentors at ABC, and before that NBC for me, Richard Wall, used to say, we just hold the coats. Both sides fight it out, we report it. But is that an outdated notion now, that each side gets to say?
I think the story gets the say. I think in the age of cable, where there is this sort of false equivalency on a story, is why, in part, people have a massive distrust in information that they're seeing. I'm talking a lot about television because that is my experience. I certainly think that, in the Trump presidency, we saw probably a resurgence and sort of refocus on print and text media. I mean, I think people within print probably felt the focus was always there, but I will say that it's certainly true that for me at Vice, most of our audience is under 30 and are not going to traditional forms of media at all. So I think the role of the more traditional papers was significant. Every story needs to get that full treatment as a journalist. There just isn't any other way. So yes, I don't think you can approach a story with sort of a simplicity in any way. And it's very complicated, and you kind of have to go in that way. It's tough.
John, Marty worked at a paper owned by one of the world's richest men. SUBRATA works at a network that was a darling of Wall Street, until it wasn't, perhaps sticking some Saudi money now. What about a local paper like the Lakeville Journal, one of the oldest weeklies in New England, still in existence, even as thousands of other papers have collapsed and died? How do you survive? What do you have to do to keep the paper going?
Well, we have to produce a paper that people really have to have. They want to see that paper every week, whether they see it online or in print. We have an obligation to create something that truly reflects what the community is all about. And that has to, a lot of the things that were just said about moving the cones, we have to be neutral. We have to give everybody their say, in a sense. And what I would say that while the Lakeville Journal Foundation has been formed and we're now a nonprofit, and there are many other nonprofit newspapers coming on the scene. In fact, I had lunch, several of us had lunch about 2 weeks ago with a man who's 93 years old and had just retired from his newspaper, which he owned until he made it a nonprofit. And he survived by focusing on the things that really matter to people, and he emphasized to me smallness and attention to detail. Journalism 101. We are a training ground for future journalists, and it's really important for us to teach them correctly how to do it, so that we don't end up with one bubble shooting at another bubble. So what we need to produce here is a product that people get excited about, want to see next week, they want to know more about. If we do a series, they want to know what's coming next in this series. And that is what I am trying to do with the staff we have there. We need to add our staff, but the bigger underlying issue, I think, with a nonprofit is that you cannot start to rely on the nonprofit, the donation, so to speak, as the way you're going to function. You need that money coming from the community because they want that paper, but you've got to have a viable economic model. You've got to have circulation and you've got to have advertising. That all comes from people supporting the paper. So that's kind of the way I see it. The bottom line is that I believe if we reflect the community the way the community is, people will want this paper, and they are starting to buy it more.
Marty, John talks about taking a neutral stance. Is that where journalism should be, or does it need to be more proactive? For instance, when newspapers say the president told lies, that's quite a comment, quite a thing to say.
Yeah, I don't like the way that those things are framed, frankly, in the current discussion. My view is our job is reporting. So the job is to go and report. That means to go out and collect the facts, keep an open mind, collect all the evidence, all the facts that you can, whatever documents, interview all the people you're supposed to interview, ask the questions, don't assume that you know the answers to the questions, go seeking the answers. And then you take a look at the totality of that and what it adds up to. And then you tell people in the most direct, forthright, unflinching way what in fact the story is. It's not a matter of, first of all, there are always more than two sides on any issue. And I don't think of it in terms of sides. I think of it in terms of what are the facts? What are the stories out there? What do we need to find out? Who do we need to talk to? What are the documents that we need to look at to find out, what is the information that we need to communicate to the public? And we don't need to be shy about how we communicate that. And we don't need to use sort of inflamed rhetoric even. We need to just tell people what the story is. And that's really what we ought to be doing. And so I don't think of it in terms of neutrality. I don't think of it in terms of balance, or some people call it both sidesism or that sort of thing, which assumes that there are two sides. But again, our job is to go out, keep an open mind, and look at all the evidence in the way that, let's say, a judge would say, gather all the evidence, you look at everything, and then you make a ruling. The way that a detective, a good detective, would look at things and say, look at all the evidence and find out where it points. And that's what we ought to be doing as journalists.
Certainly in the history of journalism, no president of the United States has loved his news coverage. During the Nixon era, Nixon sought to go after the Washington Post television station licenses because of the reporting of Woodward and Bernstein. In the new book out next week by Peter Baker and his wife Susan Glasser, The Divider, they talk about Trump trying to go after Jeff Bezos, your owner, or non-newspaper owners, some of his other companies. What was that like to deal with that kind of pressure, and how did Bezos handle it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a surprise that he was going after Bezos because he was quite open about it. One of the things about Trump is that he tells you everything that he's doing, generally on Twitter. So, and most of his criticism was on Twitter, but it's known that he wanted to raise the postal rates. Initially, he said they should be doubled. Then he said they should be tripled. Then he said they should be quadrupled. You kind of got the sense he just kind of made it up at the time, which was the case. And then he interfered in the contract called the Jedi contract which was a big cloud computing contract for the Defense Department, which Amazon was expected to win. And then he intervened and they awarded it to Microsoft, and now it's up for rebidding and all of that sort of stuff. So, and that was a $10 billion contract. So, Bezos paid $250 million for the Washington Post, and subsequent to that, people said, no, what it really cost him was $10,250 million. We covered him the way that we would cover anybody else, any other president, the way that a president, I think, should be covered. I think it's important for the press to hold the most powerful person in the world accountable. That's what our job is. That's why we have a First Amendment in this country. That's what James Madison had in mind. But Trump felt that he knew that he wasn't going to get to us as journalists, that we weren't going to bend to his pressure. So he thought that he could put pressure on Jeff Bezos. And a lot of business people, frankly, would have submitted to that pressure. But I have to say that Jeff Bezos did not, ever. I never got an invitation from him, a call or an email or anything, where he intervened in our coverage, where he suggested a story or tried to suppress a story or criticized a story or critiqued a story or anything like that. He knew that we had a job to do. He had confidence, thankfully, in the staff and in the leadership of the newsroom. Grateful for that. And he let us do our job. And he stood behind us. And he obviously paid a price for it. But I think he understood that he accepted that when he acquired the Washington Post. He had read, frankly, very thoroughly the biography of Katharine Graham. And she had come under pressure, as you indicate, from the Nixon administration, and he knew that he might someday face the same kind of pressure.
SUBRATA, when Mr. Trump called the mainstream media the enemy of the people, there was some traction. There were people who believed that. Did he put his finger on something out there about the mistrust of the media, do you think?
I think that over the years there has been sort of a separation from the people, so to speak. I mean, that's why when you talk about the importance of local media, I mean, everything about what we're seeing in the country now is that people want to be heard, they don't want to be judged, and they want to be represented accurately and fairly. And I do think that, I think certainly all of us on some level have felt that in the industry, just, shrinking of resources, people not being able to go out in the field. Again, this is what I talk about all the time. I just really feel that, the resources have to be on the story. That is where everything in journalism needs to be. You just have to do right by the story. So yes, probably, I do think that people feel that they are, we were in a different place when there were many more local newspapers, when people could feel like they had a relationship with people in their community and they weren't hearing from somebody in another city somewhere telling them how they should live their lives. But, again, I think pushing buttons was it was much more about pushing buttons than it was anything else.
So, John COSTON, you don't hear from the White House, I imagine, but you do hear from your readers and local officials, or don't you?
Oh, yes. My email is pretty much on every page of the paper, as far as I can tell. And so I get a lot of feedback on not only what's in the paper, good and bad, but I also get feedback on ideas for things we should do. And I think what SUBRATA said just a minute ago really rings true for me, which is that I believe that people really want to belong somewhere. And I think that's a deep human need. And so being part of the Lakeville Journal, which it could have some other name, could be some other paper, but it's the local paper. Being part of it is actually very important. I think our demographic is way different from yours. We are in the silver category. But we started just recently promoting a lot more videos, covering events with videos, and more on Instagram, trying to reach to a younger constituency. And we find that they really like belonging in this world. And I'm very proud of a story we did, I don't know, sometime in the summer. It was a Housatonic Valley High School track meet, and there was an athlete there who, Sydney Segala, who tripled letters this year, including in sports that she'd never been part of before. And there was just an outstanding photograph of her at the head of the pack running down the track right at the camera. And the story was about how she's succeeded at UC. She's now at Boston College on a scholarship. But that kind of story reflects back to the community, certainly to the Segala family, but it really makes them feel like they belong somewhere. And so I am not a philosopher. I'm not a psychologist. I like hard work and I like having fun. So working in a newspaper where you bring the community into the pages of the paper is very exciting for me.
Marty, we were meeting with the students at dinner before we appeared here, and they all had great interest in journalism. Many of them check the New York Times every morning, to my surprise. Is there a future out there? Are there young people who still want to be journalists, as they did following the Woodward Bernstein era when everyone wanted to be an investigative reporter?
Well, there's been enormous interest among young people in getting into journalism. It's somewhat surprising, actually, given all the turmoil in the field. But despite the turmoil, there are plenty of opportunities as well. So, journalism schools have had lots of people, a lot of women, particularly more women going into journalism, more diversity, which is great. And then, even among the readership, I think there's an assumption that the readers, for example, of the Washington Post or the New York Times are uniformly older. It's not really the case. I mean, at the Post, 30% of the readership was millennial audience or younger. And that's a pretty good number. It's not as high as Vice. Vice is higher than that. I think Vice might be the highest. The last time I looked at the numbers, Vice was like at the top in terms of youth representation. But the Post and the New York Times have very strong readership among young people. Of course, they're not reading the print paper. I don't read the print paper, so they're reading it online. They're reading it digitally. They're reading it on their phone, just like I do.
But among the new journalists, the new generation coming into newsrooms across the country, do they want to play by a different set of rules than the rules you observed when you were coming into the industry?
Well, there is a different. I think I detect a different posture. I think.
How so?
Well, I think that a lot of it. I suspect a lot of it arises from having lived through Trump, which was people found this to be an attack on their core values, the values of inclusion, the values of democracy, the values of civility. Name a whole set of values that they feel like that they were under attack, and so they felt personally attacked, and attacked directly on the press as well, being described as the enemy. And so, and I think that also this generation has sort of grown up in a period of time where they express themselves on social media. They grew up with. They've sort of moved beyond Facebook. They left Facebook behind, but with Instagram and on Reddit and all sorts of other places. And they do want to express themselves. And that's not something that journalists of my generation grew up with. We were all trained not to express ourselves. That the public wasn't interested in our opinion. Our job was, for those of the people who were in the news department, not as opposed to the opinion department, our job was to go out and report. And to do it in the most professional possible way, and that we weren't there to express our personal opinions, and we were to keep those to ourselves and to our family or close friends.
So what were the rules when you were editor about reporters being on Twitter, offering their thoughts, being part of rallies, being part of political...
Sure, well, the rules were the rules that I grew up with, and the rules were that people had to exercise care and restraint on Twitter and on Facebook and on all sorts of other places. They were not allowed to participate in protests. They were not allowed to donate to organizations that were, for example, that were involved in causes that we would cover. They were not allowed to express support for causes, to be open about that. And so those were the guidelines. I would say that I would say most of the people on the staff observe that, but that there's a certain minority of people on the staff who feel that they're entitled to self-expression, that we are not being truthful with the public in not sort of showing our own feelings, and that they're not bringing their whole selves to their work. It's not a view that I agree with, by the way. It's one that I'm adamantly opposed to. I don't think that that's our role. I think that if one wants to express an opinion, then there are many other options. Be an opinion writer, be an activist, be an advocate, go into politics, whatever. Join some sort of organization that's involved in that. I don't think that that is our role in the news department. And so that does lead to some conflict within the news organization as well.
SUBRATA, how do you handle that advice where your reporters really they are strongly involved in their stories? They're not passive reporters.
They're not passive, but I mean, I think that they are journalists, and so, you know, we have standards and practices of conduct just like everybody else, and they're all very invested in making sure that their stories sort of speak first. That said, it is different. You know, we are, we deployed to Ukraine like everybody else at that point of invasion and beyond. I think that we did a lot of traditional storytelling, but we did launch TikTok at that point. 200 million people engaged with our stories on TikTok globally. I mean, you know, 1 million people signed on. They weren't signing on for, you know, they were signing on for journalism. It feels different. It certainly feels like the reporter is really sort of speaking to you. It's very personal, it's very relational, but it is still journalism. It just feels different. So it's changed. I think you have to adapt and change because you really need to meet the audiences where they are. And so, yes, I think people would be surprised. I think they look at our organization and they sometimes feel, well, it comes in a different package, so maybe the rules have changed, but they haven't. I mean, I think that reputationally, we are facing the same challenges, and we have the same concerns. We do a lot of reporting with authoritarian regimes and a lot of anti-democratic forces out there. So you have to hold the line. Otherwise, you know, everything sort of gets called.
So do you get pushback from your staff that want to be more outspoken, perhaps?
You know, during the uprising here in the U.S., I think that it was an incredibly difficult time for everybody. We had journalists arrested. We had one journalist who was, you know, handcuffed and pepper sprayed. So, of course, you know, it felt deeply personal, and it felt like the actual job and what you did was being attacked. So there were really difficult conversations in the newsroom, but they were conversations. I think you have to be willing to discuss why you're making the decisions you're making as a leader in the newsroom now. You will still make those decisions, but you have to explain why. You know, I also came up in an industry that was very hierarchical, and I learned a lot by watching, but also there were decisions made, and I didn't necessarily feel I could question them in the newsroom because they were really being made by leadership, and you accepted that and in many ways respected it. Today, you really do need to explain why you're making those decisions, and I would say that's justified in many ways, and you have to accept that and adapt with it. And I think as people understand why you're doing it, and ultimately you're safeguarding journalism, when it truly is under attack, for the large part of the team, they accept it. And for those who challenge it, then, you know, you have to have that question of, you know, that conversation with yourself about whether you really want to be a journalist.
John, as you sit at your desk watching the sheep and what's happening in the journalism world, are you troubled by these kinds of issues where young journalists want to more and more express their own views?
Well, to some degree, yes, but there's also, I think, a more prevailing issue, and that is that young journalists seem to think that it's okay to sort of round off the numbers so that you don't really know this for sure, but it certainly seems true. One of the things
Not only young journalists.
one of the things that drives me crazy is the line, many people. You know, many people think this. Many people did that. We at the Lakeville Journal have, I'm sure Janet could give you a better range, but we have everyone from a junior in high school to senior citizens working for us. So we've never had sort of a cluster of young people all in one spot. We've had this span of ages. We've just brought on somebody new, and we are this person's in training, doing very well, and he's being tutored by our managing editor, Patrick Sullivan, who is pretty much old school journalism 101. And so we're not seeing an effort on the part of new staff trying to sort of wedge their own view into a story. The other thing is that in a small community, you can't get away with it. It's not the way it works here. So if you're covering the Planning and Zoning Commission, there are a lot of very smart people watching everything that's happening at that hearing. And your story better be pretty solid and a good reflection of what happened, because you'll hear about it. And there's no place for somebody injecting themselves into the story. I would say, one of the things about community journalism is that this is some of the detour, but I think we cover 6 towns. We used to cover more, but the paper actually brings together the community into a single group. I was told that by the first selectman of Cornwall, Gordon Ridgway, when I first met him. He said, the Lakeville Journal actually is why we have a northwest corner, because otherwise we would just have all these separate towns.
Yeah. You're the organizing principle here.
Apparently so. But again, if you make one little mistake, a lot of people will catch it.
Marty, in 10 years, will there be a Washington Post print edition? Will there be a Washington Post?
Well, there will be a Washington Post, yes. There will definitely be a Washington Post in 10 years. The Post has been quite successful since Bezos acquired it. By the time I left, we had 3 million digital-only subscribers. We had started, we didn't even have digital-only subscribers when I first started. So we went from 0 to 3 million, and the traffic has been very good as well. I don't know about print, however, that's another matter. There's now reports that the paper in Atlanta, the Journal-Constitution, may eliminate its print edition. The paper in St. Petersburg, which covers Tampa Bay, which is my hometown, I'm born and raised in Tampa, they're already down to a few days a week in terms of just the print paper. It's very inefficient. The fewer people who buy print, the more inefficient it becomes. And I think we'll reach, I would not be surprised if within the next 10 years, if not sooner, you reach the tipping point where people say it simply is cost ineffective to provide a print edition. And I think that will be true probably of the New York Times, which distributes its paper nationally. But if you actually look at their print circulation, with the exception of Sunday, which is kind of a special thing, and they give you a better rate if you take Sunday. But if you look at their circulation during the rest of the week, that's been on the decline as well. And I don't know what the economics are of providing that paper everywhere throughout the country. it's got to be difficult. So.
Will it change the character of the paper? Reporters still want to be on page one, I imagine.
Well, they want to be on the homepage. They want to be on the first page you see, and they'd like to be on the screen when you first look at it. And they would like their byline to be on the homepage too, which is not always the case. So, you know, I mean, I think that the experience online is totally different from what it is. You know, everybody's digital now. So, you know, we're at the Post, not only digital delivery of news and all the newsletters, but video and audio and TikTok. We're big and bigger. The Post was big in TikTok early on. I think had like 1 million subscribers or something for the TikTok account. And so it's just a different experience, and you're reading it on your phone, and you're expecting alerts. You want to be alerted immediately to news, and the news is being updated during the course of the day, and then things change throughout the course of the day. So it's a completely different experience, and that calls for will call for a completely different way of presenting the news. Stories are going to be different from what they were before. They'll be the way that they're written. They won't just be written. There'll be audio, there'll be video, there will be text, all within the body of a single story that you can access on your cell phone. And so the nature of journalism is going to change, I think, very dramatically. Look, it's changed over time. It's changed over time. Look, we used to just have print, then along came radio, then along came television. Television was different from radio. You don't read a radio script on television. You don't read a story on a print story on radio. And then along comes the internet, and we thought, okay, well, all we do is just upload our print stories up to the internet, and we're digital now. That's not the case. It's a completely different medium. People have a completely different relationship with it. They're getting their news at all hours of the day, and under all sorts of different circumstances. And that just changes. That's going to change the nature of the medium.
So, SUBRATA, what's the landscape for television news 10 years from now? Will Vice still be in business? Will CNN be screened to the right, or wherever they're going right now? Will the ABC, NBC, and CBS still do an evening newscast?
You know, I think streaming has greatly influenced news, and actually I would say long-form narrative news is back. I mean, people actually are watching documentaries and taking the time. I mean, you know, Brian and Rhonda know, certainly we fought battles about, you know, what our bosses thought, the audience wanted. But the truth is, once people had choice, people are investing time in sitting down for an hour and consuming what's considered news or news and informational, unscripted television. And so for Vice, we spend a lot of time doing that. Now, our additional challenges is we tell a lot of international stories, speaking from a US perspective. Well, guess what? People actually will sit down and watch that too. And it's not just on YouTube. You know, it's true, we can post a story there and really nobody is speaking English, and we, prioritize having people speak in their own language and taking the time. A lot of our reporters have 4 or 5 languages, and we will translate and just represent it that way. 10, 15, 20 million people will watch those pieces. And I would say the same for linear television, not in those numbers, but people, given the choice to subscribe, will do that. So I think news is challenged in the television space because there are a lot of decision makers and it becomes a commercial decision, and it's challenging. But when audiences are allowed to make the choice, they consume it. I mean, streaming has been a good thing for them.
But you saw CNN was set to launch CNN Plus. The new owners pulled the plug on that at great expense. What did they know? Why did they not want to go down that road?
Do you really want to go? Do we want to talk about it? I think that was a very complicated business decision in a very complex layered merger. But you can't launch something without really understanding the audience first, right? I mean, everything we're basically saying here is that, the people have spoken, they want choice, and so I think that it could be that CNN Plus on some level, and again, I don't work at CNN, so this is just what I understand to be true, that a lot of the content was conceived without a true full understanding of what news in the streaming space is. And the truth is, people don't necessarily want to hear from highly paid reporters, you know, telling them, they just actually want to see everyday people out there in the world actually experiencing the stories, tell them about it. That is why, you know, documentary film and narrative news is so powerful now, because you just actually get to hear from people themselves, and you don't have somebody layering themselves into the story, at least in an inauthentic way. So.
In fact, if you watch premier cable channels with their documentaries, there's no reporter. It's all the voices
That's right.
of the people who are involved.
That's right.
So John, let me ask you a question here, but then we're going to get to all of your questions here. In 10 years, will the Lakeville Journal still be chugging along?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I used to edit stories, and when I pushed the button, it would go to 2 million readers. You know, it's just at that time it was purely abstract to me that it was going out to 2 million people. Well, guess what? It's still abstract, and you know, I've been on the stage of national news, and you're disconnected from your reader, really. Here. At the Lakeville Journal or at any paper of this size, you're absolutely really connected to your readers. And that changes the equation in a way that I think will bode very well for the future of the paper, of any community newspapers. Community newspapers, during the COVID era, were being wiped out. They were dying at a rate that people just couldn't keep track of. And there's a slow resurgence now of them coming back. It's not they're not coming back as fast as they disappeared. But people, I think, realize that if, I'm not going to say the community dies in darkness or whatever that is. But if,
Copyright.
yeah, right. But if you don't really have a common a framework to get to know each other and find out what people are doing, you sort of lose your sense of community. And I'm not, as I said before, even qualified to talk about all this. I've just been, you know, spent my life doing newspapers and love it. But I just know that people really want to belong somewhere. And I think in a community newspaper, you really can't feel like you belong. The Lakeville Journal went through an absolute dark period during COVID. And so I think the support that the community gave it the last 2 years, and what's with the new board now, what we're hoping to accomplish, I think will guarantee this thing will be around.
And do you envision the same sort of, as Marty was talking about, with audio, video, TikTok?
Yes,
Facebook?
we have started to build up our online presence. We're about to rebuild our website, which I think will make many people happy. And we've been doing videos and Instagram, Facebook. I think we are probably going to go to a model where more news comes out every week than just weekly. It's already happening. There was a game Wednesday in Park Hampstead, Region 1 against Region 7, soccer, girls soccer. There's actually a member of the team in the audience tonight. And so we covered that with a photo and put it right up online. So that's where we're going, is getting the news out. Yeah. And but that weekly paper, I think, becomes the archive record of what happened.
And do you think you'll still be publishing a print edition?
Oh yes, I think so. I'm not in charge of that, but I think that if we can find a balance point on the size of the paper and find a way to do it, we can do that.
All right. Thank you. Let's get some questions from the audience, if there are some, and we'll start right here.
First of all, thank you. Oh. First of all, thank you.
Oh, here, is it not on?
Is it on?
We can hear you, but the audience
I meant you were
Oh.
Are we on?
I can't connect.
Yes.
can't. No, well, I'll repeat the question. What's the question? So the audience hears it.
So the question is, I yell at NPR all the time. I do have a subscription to this post, I can't remember if they do it, but they keep saying pro-life instead of people who are against abortion. So you're talking about whether reporters should opine or show their opinion. I feel like whenever they say pro-choice, when they're not talking about the organization, they're automatically doing it. And that's at NPR. Again, I can't speak to the Times of the Post because I don't remember.
Right.
So the question really is the use of the terms pro-life, pro-choice. Is that itself an opinion?
That and just the way certain things are black and white.
Yeah.
Marty?
Well, I think,
Go ahead.
the question is basically focused on terminology. The example that was given was the use of, she said she yells at NPR. Thankfully, she didn't say that she was yelling at the Washington Post. She doesn't actually remember what the Washington Post does. But I'm grateful for the lack for that. But the use of the term like pro-life or pro-choice, that simplifies and that the terminology is problematic. And I would agree. I think we give a lot of attention to what the terminology should be, and we should be very careful about that. And there's often a lot of debate about what kind of language should be used. So at the Post, the standard was not pro-life. It was anti-abortion or an abortion rights, somebody who favored abortion rights. So you have to, that's the approach that you take, because you don't necessarily want to adopt the terminology that activist groups wish for themselves, because it can give a misleading impression. We're all pro-life, right? So you have to be really careful about that. You know, that issue comes up in all different ways. So the use of the word, you know, there were lots of controversies about whether the Post should use the word falsehood, whether it should use, when it comes to Trump, whether it should use the word falsehood, or whether it should use the word lie, or whether it should use some other word, and people will argue ad infinitum about those sorts of things. And they are very difficult decisions to make. So there were also controversies about some of Trump's statements and whether they should immediately be labeled racist or you know, sometimes people would use the phrase racially charged, and then a lot of people objected to that it was outright racist. Well, what constitutes racist? What constitutes misogynist? What constitutes sexist? To what extent do you apply labels like that? And you have to be very careful about that. So, at least I think you should be. So, all of those labels are, you have to apply labels, otherwise, I mean, it's just impossible to write a story without identifying a group in brief, but you have to be very careful about the kinds of labels you use.
All right, next question. Let's see, right up here. Tim?
You got it?
Yeah.
I've got lots, but I'll only do one.
Okay, here we go.
How do you feel Rupert Murdoch has contributed to journalism in America?
I think you should ask the Wall Street Journal.
Well, I love to tell this story. It's kind of off point, but I'll get to your question. Is that I was in the office one Sunday afternoon putting out the paper, and Rupert strolls in. He comes around a lot, and he walked up and he started asking me, you know, what are you putting on 3? What are you putting on 5? You know, why are you doing that? And I turned around to him and I said, they make you work on Sunday too? But he loves it. He loves it. The thing that I experienced at the Wall Street Journal with Rupert Murdoch is that he did not do a wholesale cleaning of what we call sub-editors. So we had a hierarchy of top editors and sub-editors and then reporters and bureau chiefs. He put in 3 people at the top and left everything else the same. He invested a lot of money into the paper, which at the time the paper needed, because the way the paper was structured, we had a family that owned it that was drawing a large dividend every year, and the dividend didn't change except maybe got a little bit bigger, but we ended up having to scrounge around to find ways to save money. So we were actually struggling a little bit there in the early part of the century. So he came in and wanted to build it up, and he did spend money on it. He did not really attempt to influence our coverage, our business. The motto for the Wall Street Journal is the nation's business daily, and you can't monkey with business news and get away with it, because people depend on that in their money, in making money in their business. So he left that alone. He, I think, I can't really speak much about what he did with the New York Post, except that he kept it alive and it's still here. So it's a newspaper. But I can't really elaborate too much either on what he did in the UK, some of which has all been reported. He also has a whole family. There's a show coming up on CNN on the 25th, I think. I can't wait to see it. Murdoch's. But I think I have to say, on balance, I respect him because he loves newspapers, he invests in them, and he's just a very complicated guy. He once also was sharing with me his frustration with certain other billionaires. So that's a funny characteristic of billionaires, is that they complain about the other billionaires. But I'm not really answering your question. Except to say that in my view, I supported what he did for the Wall Street Journal.
I follow up and ask SUBRATA to follow up on Murdoch and this other journalistic output, Fox News.
You know, we have, we spend a lot of time covering extremism in the country and have had for some time. And so I would say 85% of my job now is about security, just ensuring the safety and security of our teams. Typically it would be, you know, in places where it would make sense, like in Yemen and in conflict zones and in some of the places they go. But a lot of it now is because of domestic extremism in ways that I think are, we've always, like, we can't pretend that that has not been an element in the country. But once you take that onto the airwaves in a mainstream way, you know, that reach is profound, and especially when you cloak it in anything that feels like news and information, it can be very dangerous. And so that's what I would say. I would say that, you know, it is really, really tough when you have a well-resourced network that is propagating ideas that are quite extreme.
Marty, thoughts on Fox News?
Yeah, quite a few. Look, I mean, we have a very polarized country in terms of news consumption. Among Republicans, the single most trusted outlet is Fox News. Huge levels of trust in Fox News. Among Democrats, they trust the other networks. They trust the New York Times and the Washington Post. The trust among Republicans in outlets like the one that I work for are very low. And so, you know, and no news organization is perfect. Journalists are highly imperfect. That's because we're human and we make mistakes. Make mistakes of fact, make mistakes of judgment. And that's just the nature of living a life and a career. But obviously on Fox, you've seen the promotion of all sorts of conspiracy theories. I think that Fox, particularly at the nighttime with the commentators, has been essentially nothing less than an in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign, worth billions and billions of dollars. You know, I might say the same about some other networks that are on the left, that are clearly on the left and trying to be a sort of liberal-leaning version of Fox, although I think there are substantial differences. Fox has promoted a lot of things that are just simply untrue. The most notable being that the election of 2020 was stolen. They're now the subject of obviously a couple of very significant libel suits as a result of that, brought by the voting machine companies. And I think that's hugely problematic. It's undermined, it's sabotaged our democracy. And it's not a game. This is the future of the country we're talking about. And people are and Fox is making money by promoting those conspiracies. Made money by promoting those conspiracy theories. And that's, in my opinion, that's not news.
And if Rupert Murdoch didn't want it to be the case, he could stop.
Of course he could, but it wouldn't be. What they saw after they declared that Biden won Arizona and Trump objected to that and started criticizing Fox, what happened is he saw a lot of the Fox audience go to OANN and to Newsmax. And Trump was encouraging them to do so. And from what I've been able to observe, what Fox did is it sort of doubled down on the stolen election idea in order to win those viewers back. It was not going to risk seeing a significant competitor.
And fired the pollster who made the call in Arizona.
Absolutely.
Next question.
Here we go, right here.
I would like to lower my volume. I would like to, I know in leadership roles, there's decisions you make every day that you grapple with, and I would like for you to pull back the curtain, and we're on the outside and you're on the inside. Can you share with us maybe a decision that you've had to make that maybe you've lost sleep over, trying to make the right decision, and how you've grappled with that, and what you relied on to make your final decision?
I mean,
Go ahead, SUBRATA.
yeah, I mean, I think all of us here lose a lot of sleep over. I think we decided to go into China surreptitiously, and that sounds like a very straightforward thing. It is not. It puts a lot of people at risk. And every single person that you interact with when you go into China is at high risk. But after trying in so many legitimate ways to try and report on what was happening with the Uyghur population, and really trying for 2 years and not being able to do it, we made that decision. And it was a really difficult decision to make. Because, not just because of the obvious reasons of, you know, it would shut down access, but because no matter how much you try to protect people that you interact with, just by virtue of speaking to somebody, it jeopardizes and risks them. And you know, that is a very tough place to be when you're deciding whether you're going to do. Sorry, there's this greater issue that is the suppression and potentially the elimination of an entire culture. And yet, everyone you're interacting with is going to get in trouble on some level from that government. You just can't, there is no, well, we said hello to them and they said we're not going to talk to a reporter. It doesn't matter, you made contact. And even, you know, you make every effort to protect people's identities, conceal, but nobody is ever truly anonymous, right? You know, there's in a place where there's so much surveillance and tracking, they will find you. So that was a really difficult decision to make, and I think we still talk about that a lot, and I know the reporters on the ground think about that a lot and about that piece. It was a very powerful journalism, but you know, these are everyday people, and I think that on some level, to tell a larger important story, many people were put at risk.
Next question. Let's see here. Right there, sir.
I came here because I've been doing this for 50 plus years, I think 58, thanks Bob, the details. And as someone who teaches fifth and sixth graders now about journalism, I want to know what objectivity is all about. You've addressed it in various ways, and when will the era of baseless be eliminated? Or are we going to be suffering through the use of reporters, making reporters use the word baseless in their coverage?
Sure, I'll talk about the concept of objectivity dates back more than 100 years to Walter Lippmann, who was a famous journalist, and argued that what his point was, essentially, boil it down, was that, and he expressed this in a book called Liberty in the News, was that all of us have our own preconceptions, all of us have our own biases, all of us have our own individual life experiences, and that can, while that of course can inform us about a lot of things, it can also limit our view of the world. And so that we need to take those into account when we go out and report and compensate for that, essentially. Mm-hmm. Try to be as open as possible. In the same way that if you were conducting a lab experiment, you would look at the actual evidence and look at the results. You would look at the totality of the evidence and not just presuppose what the end result would be. That is a concept that I very much believe in. I am opposed to the attacks on objectivity. I think that people have constructed a straw man, essentially, by saying, well, none of us is objective. Well, of course none of us is objective. And the original concept was, that's why we're talking about how to be objective, because none of us is objective. And so, is that we need to account for that. We need to open ourselves up to other people. One of the most important jobs we do is listen to people. Go out and talk to people, to report. If that's not what reporting is, then I don't know what reporting is. You don't go into stories thinking that you, as I indicated before, you don't go into stories thinking that you have the answers before you've done any reporting, so-called reporting. You go in seeking the answers, and that's what reporting is what that reporting is all about. And you try to do that in the classic, what I would call the classic objective way. And I think that's really important to do. And so, that's to me is an important principle. I'm disturbed at the attacks on it. I understand where they're coming from. With regard to the use of the word baseless, I assume you're referring to the use of the word baseless, particularly when that comes up in the context of the election of 2020. But I think that is actually an objective statement about the election. There is no evidence that election was stolen. It's been before something like 50 judges and 80 separate court cases and 50 judges. And it's been looked at from cybersecurity people to the Justice Department to election supervisors, been multiple audits, including the ones that are so-called audits that aren't real audits. They even concluded in the case of Arizona that Biden actually won by a bigger margin. So when you say that these are baseless accusations of a stolen election, I think it's okay to use that word because I think it's important for us to say, and it's objective to say, that they are in fact without any basis.
All right, time for a couple more questions. Let's, right here, lady right here in orange. Right here.
All right,
Thank you.
go ahead.
Hi, thank you all. This has been just a fantastic evening, so thank you for being here. What, if anything, can you as journalists do to encourage young people to vote?
Young people to vote?
To vote. SUBRATA, what do you say?
I mean, I'm here to tell you that I have complete faith I'm putting my life in the hands of the next generation. I, every day, have had, I understand that, there's a sense that this next generation perhaps is, when we talk about objectivity, when we talk about sort of people's approach to journalism, but also to engagement and voting, they are here for it. I mean, this is an incredibly engaged group of people who feel like, I'm going to say, other generations did not really leave a legacy that, you know, that is, they're in trouble. They understand on every level that they're not going to have the lives that we had, that their parents had, that their grandparents had. And so it's very real for them. So I think when they look at voting, they're going to do it because they have no choice. Now, I understand it doesn't feel like that, and maybe you get a lot of information and that says otherwise, but I can say from, you know, we do a lot of work with people under 30. We do a lot of data work with them, a lot of audience insights, and they're incredibly engaged. They're very engaged in their communities. I don't think they want to really hear from anybody on the national level. I think it is very much about, you know, you see that people are running for office. They are choosing to leave bigger cities and work in small. I mean, there is a true sort of movement, and so I understand that there's a fear about apathy. But I would, if you look at the demographics around voter turnout, I would argue that is really in a different. The demographic is older in terms of who is not turning out. So I'm not quite answering your question, but I have been wanting to say throughout this that the next generation is, you have faith, really have faith. I think that they hold me as a leader to a rigor that is incredible. I think I have learned from I've been humbled and have been educated by many people in the newsroom and by the audience in a way that I didn't expect in this position. And so it doesn't feel the same, you know, it feels different, but the world has really shifted. And, you know, I think a very good example is, I think, you know, the way people use the tools available to them to influence. It is very hard to imagine that that has impact, but it does. Sometimes you're like, why are you always on your phone? People are actually on their phone engaging in a way that we haven't seen before. It's very affirming.
And seeking information.
They're seeking information, and also, I think, finding, you know, engaging with people on a level that I think there is a real global conversation going on, I think. When we talk about sort of American journalism and democracy, I think people feel very much tied into something that is much bigger than just, there is something going on beyond that.
Very encouraging to hear that. Time for a couple more questions. Let's go over on this side. Right there, yes. Sir?
One thing that hasn't come up in the discussions this evening is social media, and I'm curious to know how the panelists feel about social media. Will it prove to be the undoing of journalism as we know it, or will it somehow evolve to be the future of journalism?
I mean, I think that it is like any sort of tool, you know, can be dangerous, but I don't think it will be the undoing of journalism. I think it has brought a lot of voices in. If you look at Myanmar or countries where are actively being suppressed, it's the only way that people are able to get their stories out. It's empowered and engaged an entire new set of voices. So that's one way of looking at it. There's the other set that, you know, we talked about earlier, where people are very quick to offer opinion on things they don't know anything about. And that can be very dangerous. But it's a balancing act. And I think in a global organization, I see people who never had a chance to say anything and be heard, actually be heard. You know, I'm thinking about this murder of this woman in Pakistan, not a place where she was going to get justice in this, and they did so because of the social campaign. They really did. Now, given the change in the regime, I don't know what's going to happen, but in that moment, that is because of a social media campaign.
And to your point, I think it enhances journalism.
It can. It can
destroy
be abused, yeah.
right?
Well, keep in mind, without social media, we would reach far fewer readers, by the way. I mean, a lot of people see our stories because they have shown up on their Facebook feed. or because someone passed them along on Twitter, or because somebody did it on Reddit or wherever it might be. It actually has enhanced the overall reach of journalism that we practice. So we would, if all we had was a print newspaper in Washington, we would reach the Washington metro area, period. That would be it, unless it was picked up by a telephone network.
The other thing that back to the question about how to encourage young people to vote, social media is just another way that I see the younger generation making sense out of the world in a way that we didn't. They were actually figuring stuff out. They're very smart. And so I don't see it as a threat. I see it, as you mentioned, as a sort of another aspect of the experience that everybody's having, trying to make sense out of this world.
All right, next question, just a couple more. Right here, sir.
My question concerns in-depth journalism. In the heyday of print media, when you had the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal doing lengthy, investigative, multi-issue articles on a single topic, as you look at the news today, you see everything or a lot of things are in bite-sized, small increments. The networks at 6 and at 11 o'clock, they want a 30-second news clip, not a 2-hour reportage. With the exception of PBS and maybe some Sunday morning shows, where do you see in-depth reporting going with small increments of people's apparent interest?
Well, I really beg to differ. Washington Post has some incredibly long stories. Sometimes they're too long. And same with the New York Times, and same with the magazines, whether it's the New Yorker or the New Yorker or the Atlantic or what have you. And as you heard earlier, documentaries have become very popular, so there's a lot of in-depth journalism being done through documentary programming as well. And I think there's an enormous amount. I think that it's a bit of a myth that more of this was done in the past. I actually was there in the past, so I can speak for that. There was a lot of good journalism being done. Yes, they were multi-part series. They may be packaged differently today, but because the reality is that these multi-part series, the actual readership from part 1 to part 15, you can believe that it's actually diminished considerably over the course of the series. So you want more people to read it, you want it to reach more people, and more people to pay attention throughout the series. But there is an enormous amount of very in-depth journalism being practiced today.
That's true.
And by the way, books is another form of journalism, and there's a lot of podcasts and a lot of that is being done today.
Right, the networks no longer just put their hour documentaries on between Christmas and New Year's, as they once did. A couple more questions up here.
You're talking about objectivity, and when a national leader comes after the press and saying fake news, how does that make you and your editors and your reporters feel, and how do you respond to that? How do you work with that?
You know, it does lead to a lot of hostility in the field. That's the thing. There is a direct connection when the most powerful person in the world says something about what you do. And journalism is a job. You know, it's a passion, it's a calling, but it is a job, and somebody's sort of calling out your profession. But because it's a job, you double down and do your job. I think it is. You know, there's a lot of, there's certainly, you feel every day like you're going into battle, but that's for a lot of reasons. I think you have a strong emotional reaction. We're all human, right? But I think that the only thing I can speak to is that kind of, that sort of declarative thing really does make it very hard to operate in the field. And I say this all the time. I have a lot of admiration for our people in the field. They deal with a lot of hostility unnecessarily.
Next question up here. Lady right here, taking off her mask.
I'm a journalist, but I'm no longer in a newsroom because I'm a freelancer, and I'm wondering, at the national level, what are the kinds of conversations happening around how to win back or win over the people who've, and I'm shorthanding this here, sort of fallen for Fox News? What are the conversations in the newsroom or organizationally or at the top level of leadership in journalism for how to sort of contend with what's happened to our country and this huge swath of the population that's not going for what's true, besides just continuing to tell good stories and to muckrake?
Right. I mean, we don't really, when I was at Post, we didn't think of it, how do we win back the Fox viewer? Because we tried to, we tried to set goals that we could accomplish. But I'm be serious about it. Look, I mean, it's not the first time the press has come under attack in this country. You may remember during the Nixon administration, Spiro Agnew, as vice president, was constantly attacking the press. The reputation of the press during that period of time, particularly during Watergate, wasn't so high until after Watergate. All of the facts came out about Watergate, and then everybody said, "Oh well, Woodward and Bernstein, they're heroes. We're going to have a movie about them, and Robert Redford is going to play Bob Woodward." And so then the reputation of the press rose after that, and then started to sink again. I try to think in terms of the long run. Our story, we have to do our job, we have to do it right. It has to be factual, it has to be fair, and it has to be validated over time. If these stories are validated over time, I feel relatively confident that people will begin to recognize that. I don't expect that we'll win over everybody, because I think that's really almost impossible. But I think that we can get back people who are at the margins, people who are open to evidence, people who are open to facts, people who are open to who are open-minded. And we have to present our stories in a way as if we were, differently than we have in the past, as if we were a lawyer in front of a jury. We need to show the evidence. So if we're saying there's a document that says this, we need to present that document online and have people, they can see it for themselves. We can annotate that document now with the tools that we have and point people to exactly where we've gotten that. We say this happened and there's a video of it, and we provide that video where people can see it for themselves.
Asking, how do you even win them over if they're not coming to you? How do you win?
I'll just throw in I've been doing this for a long time. I've never actually started out my day figuring out how I'm going to win over anybody. It's really, you're just focused on the work. It isn't our job, I don't think, to figure out how to change the dynamic of the electorate. It's just to tell the story, sort of what you were saying. So, and I respect what you're saying, but we just really, we're not that organized.
But as a broader point, local journalism, community journalism is that. I mean, that's why it's so important. It's really important for people, again, not to get news, to have some sort of local reflection in news. I think that what you're seeing and feeling is the law of, the end result of the diminishing of local newspapers, really, and just sort of community kind of engagement.
Well, it's 9 o'clock. I want to thank John COSTON. Thank you for your support of the Lakeville Journal. Thank you for supporting journalism. And thank you for what you do for the country.